Summer in the countryside was always the same. Long days of swimming, horseback riding, and endless fields stretching beneath a golden sun. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. After a few days, the novelty of fresh air and rolling hills faded, leaving me restless. I needed something more, something different. That's when I convinced my cousin Alex to take me somewhere new. There's not much left to see, he shrugged, kicking at the dry dirt beneath his boots. You've already been everywhere. Not everywhere. I leaned in, lowering my voice. What about the old house? His expression darkened, the easygoing smirk on his face faltering. He glanced toward the horizon, as if he could see it from here. You don't want to go there. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. With enough persistence, I wore him down. We set out after breakfast, following a narrow path that wound through the fields and into the trees. The sun was already high, and the air was thick with the scent of dry grass and earth. As we walked, Alex kept his hands stuffed into his pockets, shoulders tense. No one's lived there for years, he muttered. My dad says it used to be the main house, way before our grandparents bought the land. No one talks about it much. Just people moved out, and it got left behind. But why? I asked. He hesitated. Weird stuff happens there. That only fueled my excitement. The house came into view sooner than I expected, standing alone at the edge of the trees. It was smaller than I imagined, not tiny, but nowhere near as grand as I pictured. The walls were faded, the wood warped from years of neglect. The windows were dark, like empty eyes watching us approach. A heavy silence hung over the place, unnatural in the buzzing heat of summer. The front door wasn't locked. In fact, it wasn't even closed properly. You sure about this? Alex asked. I swallowed hard and nodded. We stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and something else, something faint but unmistakable. Damp wood and old rot. The first thing I noticed was the walls. They were covered in scratches, long and jagged, as if something had clawed at them in desperation. Dark stains bloomed across the faded wallpaper. I told myself it was just age, just water damage or peeling paint. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Alex shifted beside me, uneasy. It wasn't like this last time. His voice barely broke the silence. A narrow hallway stretched to the right, leading to the bedrooms. To the left, an open doorway led to what must have been the dining room, beyond which was the kitchen. We took the hallway. The first room was empty, just dust and broken floorboards. The second and third rooms were the same, untouched, forgotten. Then we reached the last door. It was bigger than the others, and as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it cold, despite the summer heat pressing against the house from the outside. Something was wrong here. A single wardrobe stood in the corner. My heart pounded as we moved toward it, the wooden floor creaking beneath our steps. Alex hesitated, then reached for the handle. We pulled the door open. Nothing, just darkness and dust. Then, somewhere behind us, footsteps, slow, steady, moving down the hallway. We weren't alone. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom door. I held my breath, gripping Alex's arm so tightly I could feel his pulse hammering beneath his skin. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe the old wood was settling. Maybe an animal had wandered inside. But deep down, I knew better. Alex turned his head toward the door, his breathing uneven. He was waiting too, listening. Silence. And then, the floor creaked. Not the random groan of an empty house shifting in the wind. This was deliberate, slow, the sound of someone, or something, taking a step closer. I wanted to look, to confirm that nothing was there, but I was terrified of what I might see. Alex moved first, with a sharp breath. He yanked me toward the door, pulling me into the hallway before I could protest. The corridor stretched ahead of us, the dim light from outside casting long, eerie shadows. It was empty. Nothing stood where we had heard the footsteps. I turned to Alex, my throat dry. "You heard that, right?" He nodded, his face pale. "We're getting out of here." But before we could take another step, a sound rose from deeper inside the house, a whisper, low and breathy, curling through the silence like smoke. I froze. The voice was too soft to make out the words, but it was there, unmistakable. Alex grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the front door. His grip was tight, almost painful, but I didn't care. I wanted out. We rushed through the living room, past those clawed-up walls, past those dark stains that suddenly seemed even more sinister. The open door was only a few steps away, and then Alex stopped. He sucked in a sharp breath, his fingers twitching against my wrist. His gaze was locked on something just beyond the threshold. I followed his eyes. There, standing in the doorway, was a shape, not solid, not fully formed, just a dense, swirling gray mist, shifting and flickering like it couldn't quite hold itself together. But it had a shape, a human shape, and it was blocking our way out. A chill ran down my spine, a feeling so unnatural, so wrong, that every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then, before I could even think to move, Alex gasped, his body jerking violently. He let go of me, doubling over as he clutched his arm. "It burns," he choked out. "It burns." I looked down. Red marks were appearing on his skin, rising and thin, jagged lines as if invisible claws were raking across his flesh. His neck, his arms, his skin was breaking out in angry welts, spreading fast. Panic surged through me. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to help. My only thought was we need to get out now. I grabbed his hand and bolted, dragging him forward, straight through the misty figure. For a brief, terrible moment, it felt like stepping into ice water. My skin prickled, my lungs tightened, and a whisper curled into my ear so close. Then we were outside, stumbling into the warm, golden light of day. Alex collapsed onto the grass, gasping. The red marks on his skin were still there, raw and angry, but the burning seemed to be fading. I turned back toward the house, my heart pounding. The doorway was empty. The mist was gone. But I knew, deep in my gut, that we hadn't imagined it. And whatever had been in that house, it had touched us. Back at the farmhouse, Alex's mother hovered over him, pressing a damp cloth to the angry red marks on his skin. The look on her face was a mix of concern and confusion. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. Alex shook his head. "Not as bad, just itchy now." His skin, which had been covered in welts moments ago, was already fading back to normal. No explanation, no reason, just disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I sat across the room, my hands gripping my knees, still trying to process everything. The whispers, the footsteps, the thing that had blocked the door. I glanced at Alex, hoping he'd say something, crack a joke, anything to make it feel less real. He didn't. During dinner, we told everyone what had happened. The footsteps, the marks, the misty figure. Alex's uncle, his mother's boyfriend, leaned back in his chair, frowning. "Could be someone squatting there," he suggested. "People hide out in abandoned houses all the time." "But we didn't see anyone," I argued. "Just heard the footsteps, and the marks on Alex's skin. Poison ivy, maybe." I opened my mouth to protest. But what was I supposed to say? No, it wasn't poison ivy. It was something unseen clawing at him from the dark. Alex spoke up, his voice quiet. "I've been in that house before. Never went in the bedrooms, but I've been inside. And nothing like this ever happened." His uncle sighed and pushed his chair back. "Well, I'll go check it out in the morning. If someone's staying there, They'll be long gone by now. Alex and I exchanged a look. Neither of us wanted to go back. But the next morning, when his uncle grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar, we followed him anyway. The house looked different in daylight, less threatening, more like just another abandoned building. But as we stepped inside, the air was still thick, heavy, like the house was watching. Alex and I stayed near the entrance while his uncle walked through each room, checking closets, looking under broken furniture. Every part of me was tense, waiting for something to move in the corner of my eye, waiting to hear those whispers again. Nothing. Then his uncle reached the bedroom, the one with the armchair, the one where we had heard it. He paused in the doorway, frowning. Alex and I stepped closer, expecting to see the same deep scratches on the walls, the same dark stains. But the room was normal. The walls were smooth. No scratches, no marks, no stains, as if nothing had ever happened. My stomach twisted, but his uncle shook his head. Looks like just another empty house to me. Alex grabbed my arm, his grip tightening. I turned to him, confused, until I saw the look on his face. His eyes were locked on the armchair, because now, sitting there as if it had always been, was something that hadn't been there before. A mirror, small, cracked, resting against the faded upholstery, and in its dusty surface, a faint, lingering handprint. Alex and I stood frozen, staring at the mirror. It wasn't there yesterday. I was sure of it. The glass was old and cloudy, cracks webbing across its surface. The frame, once ornate, was now chipped and rotting. But what made my skin crawl was the faint, smudged handprint in the center of the glass. It was small, too small to belong to Alex's uncle, too small to be mine. Did you touch that?" I whispered. Alex shook his head. His uncle glanced between us, unimpressed. "It's just an old mirror." He stepped forward, reaching for it. "No!" Alex and I both shouted at the same time. But it was too late. His fingers brushed the glass. The air shifted. A wave of cold rippled through the room, sudden and sharp, like a gust of wind from nowhere. The house groaned, the old wooden beams above us creaking under a pressure we couldn't see. I felt it then, that same sensation from before. Something watching. Alex's uncle yanked his hand back, shaking it like he'd been burned. His face twisted in confusion. What the hell? A loud bang echoed through the house. Not from this room, from the hallway. The three of us turned at the same time. The bedroom door, which had been wide open, was now shut. Alex grabbed my wrist. "We need to go." His uncle, now clearly unnerved, nodded. "Yeah, now." He led the way, shoving the bedroom door open again. It swung without resistance, revealing the empty, dust-covered hallway. We moved quickly, retracing our steps toward the front of the house. But something felt off. The house didn't look the same. The walls seemed narrower, the shadows darker. The air was heavy, pressing down on my chest with every step. We reached the living room. Almost there. That's when I heard it. A whisper, right next to my ear. "Don't leave." I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. Alex must have heard it too, because he squeezed my arm, his face pale. "Go." We burst out the front door, stumbling onto the overgrown grass outside. The sunlight hit my skin, warm and grounding. I gasped, sucking in air like I'd been drowning. Alex's uncle locked his jaw, glancing back at the house. "No one's living here. That's for damn sure." But we weren't looking at him. We were looking at the front window, because for just a second, we saw something standing there. A figure. No features. Just a dark, humanoid shape, standing behind the glass, watching us leave. We didn't speak as we walked back to the farmhouse. Not at first. I could still feel the weight of that thing's stare from the window. The image of its dark silhouette was burned into my mind. Alex's uncle led the way, his usual confidence replaced with a tense, focused silence. I think, deep down, he was trying to rationalize what had happened. Alex, though, he looked shaken. "I told you," he muttered, voice low. "I told you something was wrong with that house." I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. By the time we reached the farmhouse, the sun had started to set. A golden glow stretched across the fields, long shadows crawling along the dirt path behind us. But even as we stood in the warm light of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had brought something back with us. Dinner that night was quiet. Alex barely touched his food, his mother noticing immediately. "You feeling all right?" He hesitated, "Just tired." His uncle, on the other hand, seemed eager to put the whole thing behind him. "He only mentioned the house once. Nobody's been in there for years," he said, chewing slowly. "But that mirror, I don't remember it being there before." A chill ran down my spine. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, the farmhouse lights flickered. Just for a second, just long enough for Alex and me to exchange a nervous glance. His uncle waved it off. "Old wiring. Maybe." But then, later that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I heard something outside my window. Soft footsteps, right below my room. I held my breath, lying completely still. A shadow moved across the moonlit curtains. It was tall, watching, waiting. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. But I knew we never should have gone back to that house, and whatever had been inside it wasn't done with us yet. If you enjoyed this chilling story, don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Fear and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Here, you'll find more real stories filled with mystery, psychological horror, and the supernatural every week. Before you go, make sure to check out the 2 videos that just popped up in the end screen. I promise, they'll leave you with goosebumps. See you next time, if you dare.